When you think of the word Yankee, what's the first thing to pop into your mind?
Oh, I know!
Okay, what's the second thing to pop into your mind? But you don't even like sports! Fine! Yankee! Yankee! Ugh, wise ass.
Oh, that's easy!
I mean, yeah, but just... never mind. So, building off of what we laid out last time, what makes these hot-blooded delinquents so appealing in a rom-com?
I actually think this one's the easiest, and it can all be summed up by a single word. Contrast.
Personally, I like the word dichotomy. There are two ways of looking at it based on the perspective you want to take. There's the personal perspective, which I like to break down into an intrapersonal and interpersonal approach, looking at the delinquent themselves and analyzing their core personality, as well as breaking down their relationships and behaviors towards others.
Then there's the meta perspective. When you think about it, it's difficult to imagine, right? A character who's supposed to be a tough-as-nails thug obviously doesn't fit in some floofy, silly little rom-com. Or do they? Well, that's what we mean. In a meta perspective, you zoom out and take a top-down view of the whole story and the delinquent's role in it. And in this case, those contradictions are key.
It might seem a bit overly simple, but it's actually a pretty broadly accepted principle at this point. The personal perspective is the one that likely jumps out at you first in this case, because here, it's a classic and well-studied phenomenon that revolves around a character exhibiting behavior that's otherwise contradictory to the general presentation of their personality. These contradictions are part of what fandom circles have coined gap.
And you probably already know where we're going with this.
Maybe the single most popular of these is, of course, the domain of Kugimiya Rie herself, the tsundere.
Remember how in our video on teasing girls, we talked about how Zooey Deschanel was basically always being typecast as the manic pixie dream girl? Well...
Kugimiya Rie is that, but for the tsundere. And it's not too hard to see why. The thing is that the role pretty much requires a few things she's really good at. Most notably, the ability to shift her entire demeanor at the drop of a hat.
For those of you who somehow don't know, the tsundere is a sort of cliche in manga and anime, revolving around a character who's really hot-tempered and harsh, as a general rule, but has a cute and little sweet side to them too.
There's a lot more to them than that, contrary to what a lot of talking heads on the internet say about it. But that's all we really need to get into today, because that's where our interest in them stops for the subject of the Yankee. Looking at the personal perspective, I want to say that in the overwhelming majority of rom-coms where the main love interest is a Yankee, especially if it's a girl, the hero or heroine is a tsundere. And the Yankee archetype is used to sort of explain their tsundere tendencies. There are cases where the lead isn't a tsundere, or maybe they just lean closer to the dere side than the tsun side, but one, that's still a contradiction, and two, that dips more into the meta perspective.
Either way, it's a kind of trope shorthand. Your heroine needs to be aggressive, temperamental, and crass? Send in the Yankee! That way she checks all of those boxes. Then, the effect of just being in a rom-com will naturally make her softer, cuter, lovey-dovey side come out.
Plenty of stories do this, but the most recent example that comes to mind is Please Go Home Akutsu-san.
If we ignore the original one-shot, you can kind of see what we mean right away. Akutsu is really, assertive, demanding, hot-headed.
Bully. She's a bully. She takes over Oyama's apartment on a whim and uses it as a lounge. Not because she has any interest in him at all, but because he lives alone and she can use him as an errand boy while she avoids school and her house like the plague. The time she doesn't spend slacking off is spent teasing him for a laugh.
And it's pretty clear that saying no isn't exactly an option.
Yeah, no. She'll definitely kick his ass. But again, that's early on. We actually start to see her cute or dere side around chapter 7. Hell, the first time I'd argue we see her actually showing genuine interest in Oyama is as early as chapter 14. In it, Oyama had something to do, so he wasn't home until late.
But Akutsu didn't know that. He thought she'd just go home when she knew he wasn't there. Bzzzt, incorrect! Instead, she sat outside his apartment and pounded on his door for him to let her in. You know, like a perfectly reasonable person.
Fitting behavior for a Yankee. But the real point is what happened after that. The reason she was so angry, which she admits on her own, is that she thought he was ignoring her. She wants him to pay attention to her.
It got to the point where she made him exchange contact info with her, and she was actually really bashful about it. That's the kind of gap we're talking about. The separation between those two sides is a huge part of the supposed appeal. Acceptable behavior in real life? Yeah, no. But in a story like this, it's just kind of par for the course.
It's also worth noting that in romantic examples, the dere side almost never comes out with any character who isn't the heroine's love interest. And if it does, then it's generally in scenes where the love interest is at least being talked about if they're not also in the room.
This is pretty easy to see with Akutsu-san too. She actually has a couple of friends, Misaki and Yoko, but she's never bashful or cutesy with them at all.
Unless they're talking about Oyama. And it only ramps up over time as Akutsu and Oyama become more conscious of each other, to the point where Misaki and Yoko basically become Akutsu's wingwomen and try to help her level up her and Oyama's relationship.
You could probably also look at her and think that the cute side is coming out because she's never been in a situation like that before and doesn't know how to deal with those emotions.
So her first reaction is to try to punch said emotions, which just leans into the awkward factor and cuteness of the whole scenario. Tough girl falls in love and now she doesn't know how to communicate it.
But that's all pretty basic, isn't it? At the end of the day, Akutsu-san is a series that just uses the Yankee label to explain the title character's behavior. So what about a series that actually uses the whole Yankee thing more?
Well, that's where we hit a snag. When it comes to Yankee girls, we searched for manga to help with this and found basically nothing that didn't just reinforce the same points we made about Akutsu.
There's Kuzuhana-san, but she's more of an inverted tsundere where she's pretty sweet to the hero of the book like all the time and only gets aggressive with others. But even that's almost always defensive. She mostly just tries to avoid any problems and only threatens anyone if they threaten her friends. She's a Yankee on the surface, but only on the surface. The manga even goes out of its way to explain that her reputation is essentially the result of a misunderstanding.
Other examples were pretty similar. The heroine wasn't actually a Yankee, they just play one on TV. But then, we had a brilliant idea.
Technically, this series is called The Appeal of the Delinquent, not The Appeal of the Delinquent Girl.
So we broadened our search parameters a bit and found Megane Tokidoki Yankee-kun. Yep, this one's about a boy. I know, blasphemy.
This is where the meta-context comes in. First of all, and I'm sure this is already obvious, but this one is actually a shoujo series, not a shonen, so it's aimed at girls.
Right off the bat, there's a lot we could say there. After all, the appeal of a delinquent guy is kinda different inherently. This is a uniquely bad example of it, but it's often associated with the stereotype of all girls love bad boys or whatever.
And while I could write a book about why that's objectively stupid, that's not really the point here. The point is that this story gives us a bit of a different context to view the story through. It's about the main hero Ichikura being an ex-delinquent, and the heroine, Momose, being an average girl who doesn't like delinquents. So there's friction right at the beginning.
Because the story revolves around Ichikura's delinquency, your attention is called to it. Then you realize that you're reading a floofy rom-com. Automatically, you're in a position where the delinquent element stands out, and those rosy rom-com glasses get to highlight the better aspects of his character, most of which are informed by him having been a delinquent in the past. It's not something that just goes away.
And I honestly don't think that would change much if he was still a delinquent when the story began. His appeal isn't despite the fact that he was a delinquent, it's because he was one.
So when you see this delinquent in a series that he really doesn't seem like he should be in, you get to romanticize certain elements about them. You start to pick up on the ways that this blunt, hot-tempered ruffian navigates being in that kind of environment.
They communicate their feelings in a way that's different, but stands out. Maybe it isn't something they do often, so it's more meaningful. Or maybe their attitude about the whole thing is as blunt as it is with everything else, and it's viewed as refreshingly simple.
It goes further than that, too. Look at how they solve problems, for example. Sure, they might solve certain ones more, violently, but even if a fist is never thrown, their boldness in confronting a seemingly delicate problem, instead of tiptoeing around it like characters in these types of stories tend to do, could be seen as a major plus.
The point is the contrast. Expectation versus reality.
Or the gap. Presentation versus behavior.
That's our case for the Yankee anyway, but we're not done with this whole topic yet, obviously.
Because from here on out, it's all about the gyaru.
My favorite! Till then, let us know what your favorite anime or manga Yankee is in the comments.
Don't worry, you don't have to say Jotaro. Wrong answers are completely allowed. But if you want to make sure your answer is always right, then give that like button a zap and subscribe while you're down there.
If you really want to show your support, join the Geek Machine Patreon or check out our store at teamgeekmachine.com, where you can get all kinds of adorable merch. Maybe you can even get in some light reading while you're there. For now, that's my sister Riley.
She's my sister Rila.
Thanks for watching.
Keep up the awesome and
Stay tuned!